Welcome to the Dash Arts podcast, seeing the world through an artistic lens. I'm Josephine Burton, Artistic Director of Dash Arts.
And I'm Marie Horner, the producer for this podcast.
It's lovely to have you with us, Marie.
Thank you.
So this podcast is the third in our kind of mini-series on our public house. We're very proud of the last two episodes, which we really give a beautiful picture of the voices and the people we've worked with across the country. So I totally encourage you to go back and listen to episodes 1 and 2 to learn more about the project. We've been travelling up and down, meeting people, amplifying people's voices through speechwriting. We've supported them to make and deliver speeches about what they care about and what they want to change and what they feel is being ignored.
And during November, we held 3 live events called Speak Out, and they were at home in Manchester and the Tabernacle in London.
The events were sort of for really to celebrate the academics who came with us on the project, Alan and Henrietta, who really enabled this project to happen, not only through their brilliant kind of academic and expertise and knowledge, but also through their funding. And the kind of project, I mean, they brought funding with them. They paid for it out of their own pockets. No. They enabled, thanks to the Arts and Humanities Research Council, they were able to bring the funding with them to support this sort of project. They had this great theory that these workshops would enable people to speak out about things they believe in. And so these events in November were a way to draw the attention of the public and their academic connections to this work and celebrate it so that we could hear some of the participants and talk more widely about the process of speechwriting, the power of it, that they were the events to mark the culmination of the project in its first stage, which for us is just the beginning of the journey as an arts organisation to making a new show, but for them was the work.
And it was such an incredible opportunity to hear from the participants that we'd met all over the country. And we felt like for this episode, it was a real opportunity to sort of zoom in on 3 of those participants, though there's been so many more, but who were able to encapsulate some of the things that we'd learned and some of the takeaways that we're now moving forward with within the project. One of those people is Kaylee, who we first met at HMP Styal, which is a women's prison up in Manchester. And it was the first workshop that I went to as part of our public house. It'd be great just to touch on that and what it was like for us, for you, working with those women in that prison.
I'm really happy that you suggested that we focus on Kaylee, because we haven't really talked about those workshops in Styal, and they were such a valuable experience. I hope for the participants, but also hugely for us as a team to sort of go to meet up, to bring you in, Marie, with us, to put ourselves through the very high security rigmarole of leaving all our phones and all our lives belongings the other side of the gate and going through a series of gates in order to walk around their open prison. So it's actually a strange experience, because it is a former orphanage that's been converted into a prison, which has particular resonance for the workshops, because like one of the most powerful things was the fact that came up through the process was the women who were sharing their sense of loss and sadness about not being with their children, and to feel that. And when one of the participants mentioned the fact that they were in prison prevents them from being there to support their child there as they reach kind of puberty and teenagerhood, and to look around the room and feel that everyone in that moment was listening and supporting this person sharing that, but also in their own loss in that moment. You could sort of feel the kind of weight of that in the room. It was very powerful and sad and emotional for us all, because we're all parents, actually, all the participants, all the workshop leaders are parents too, so we all shared that moment of sadness. And to be feeling that in an orphanage feels incredibly poignant.
I remember so viscerally when that moment happened. We'd only been working with them for a matter of hours, and that was a significant takeaway from me, that trust that we built so quickly with those women, and that interaction. It wasn't one way. It could very much have felt like we were going in asking loads of questions, asking for story. But I think that's such a good example of where that trust enabled us to share an experience.
They shared it with us. It was not, it was absolutely you're absolutely right. I think I think we've talked previously on the podcast about the games that we play in order to build the community that enable people to feel like it's a safe environment for them to go on the process. And as we were plotting the games for that particular visit, we did our preparation before we went into the prison. We have one game where we do name games so that we all learn each other's names, and we walk towards people and we test whether we've absorbed who everyone's names are by looking at them, by going towards them and saying their name. And then there's another version of that name game where you don't actually name the person you're walking towards. You look them in the eyes as you walk towards them, and you kind of hold that eye contact, and then that person picks up the eye contact and moves forward. And we weren't sure whether that would be something that people were happy to do. What would be the environment in the room when we walked in? Would there be trust? But even would there be a whole lot of resentment that would come that would prevent us from forming a kind of cohesive group, which I've sort of now discovered is at the heart of all the work that we've done, is creating the community that enables people to share their voices. And it was really heartwarming and fascinating for us all, I think, to have the prejudice that we might not be able to create that environment in the room because people might not even trust or want to trust each other. But to see that almost immediately actually in that room, that they were up for it, that they were joking with each other, that there was a love in that room for each other, and support, broke my sort of stereotypes, I think, of what the experience would be for me, but it also enabled that person to share their story. And also, I think, for people like Kaylee to feel comfortable to write the speech that she did.
It was such an incredible opportunity for Kaylee, who was released since we did that workshop, and it meant that she could join us at home in Manchester to share her speech in person.
In the TV documentary, My Secret Past, pop star Shane Lynch talked about his dyslexia and the problems it caused him. At one point, he explained that 40% of people in prison have dyslexia. I am one of them. Why is it that it took me to go into prison to figure out that I needed extra educational support? Why wasn't an educational healthcare plan available to me? Why aren't education healthcare plans available to everyone who needs them? If I had access to an education healthcare plan, I might now be following my dream of working in the performing arts. It's not just me. There are lots of young people that haven't had these education healthcare plans. We need to change this. What is an education healthcare plan? An education healthcare plan is a support plan created specifically for an individual. This covers what a person needs for their education and their health and social care needs. It's particular for people who have disabilities. I should have had extra support in school. I needed extra time for exams. I needed a blue overlay and a blue exercise book to help me accomplish simple literacy skills. If I had been given this extra support, I would have stayed in school and got my GCSE maths and English. I would be accomplishing my dreams of working in performing arts. I would never have ended up in prison. There are now 517,000 people with education healthcare plans in the UK. Half of these people have been awarded these in 2022 and 2023. Finally, the UK is waking up to the challenge and realising that people need support, but it has to go further and it has to go faster. If people had been given plans earlier, many wouldn't be in prison. In Styal prison, there are very big waiting lists for English and maths. Although this is a positive, that so many want to learn, the negative part is that so many learners have not gained their basic literacy and math skills before coming here. If you were to tell me that we cannot afford the cost of education healthcare plans, then you are telling me that people like me should end up in prison. Why are we so worried about the cost of things when a young person's education, a young person's life is priceless? You may be thinking that there are other things that money should be spent on.
Kaylee's emotional, heartfelt words really underlines for me the power that this project has of helping people and supporting people in finding their voice.
There was never a moment in any of the workshops when they were asked that question of what do you want to change, where someone didn't have an answer. And I think it's such a big question, but it's also so relatable but they may just not have been asked that before. So to have that platform, and Kaylee really took it and ran with it and used it to really pinpoint what she wanted to change.
Yeah, I mean, I think it always starts so personally. So Kaylee talked about her blue overlay and the paper that she needed and the things that she needed in order to thrive. And but what the amazing thing about the speech every time is that you will believe it. Like, it becomes bigger than her. It's not just about Kaylee in the end. It's just about the wider issue. And obviously when we were preparing to have her as part of our event in Manchester, the wonderful people at Novus, who are the organisation that brought us into the prisons, gave us a whole bunch of stats. 71% of inmates in prisons come to prison without any educational qualifications. So Kaylee, who talked with such great kind of power about the fact that she wouldn't be in prison were she to have had a better education. I mean, she really is speaking to that enormous numbers of people who end up in prison.
And that, for me, is the power of this project. Because you're right, and I've heard that statistic before. I think it's from the Prisoner Education Trust. And that it gives a personal point to it. And for me, that's good speech writing. There's evidence, there's statistics which will speak to some people. But for me, this project gave life to it and sincerity to it and authenticity to it.
What is totally wonderful was, particularly for Kaylee, and I'm sorry that, I hope Monday we will have an opportunity to work with other of the learners in Styal and support them in their ongoing journey, because, we gave Kaylee that platform and she seized it. She was there with bells on. We provided her with a platform from which she will definitely, I am sure, go on to take some of those opportunities that emerge through it and continue on her journey. And it's wonderful to feel like it's not just giving her a voice, but I hope this project is giving her a platform to be heard.
Brilliantly, she caught up with Chris, the producer from Dash Arts, our brilliant producer, who behind the scenes just after the event. And Chris also spoke to Michael, who was another one of the participants that we heard from.
Well, it was a great experience, but also it's given me opportunities, because I've had 2 people now come to me and say I should go back into creative writing and performance, and I've got an offer for someone called Hattie Naylor, and she's based in Sheffield, Hallam University. She's just given me her details and she said, you can try and come here if you want, and we've got courses available for you. And I don't even need maths or nothing like that to get into it. She said I can do it just with the English that I've got.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And how did you think tonight went?
At first I was a bit nervous, but then when it's all over and it's done, it's I feel better now. I feel more relieved and relaxed. Now. It was a brilliant experience, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for taking part. Thank you. Thank you. We'll be in touch. All right, Michael, what do you make of this whole thing?
Absolutely amazing. Never done anything like this before, but following on from other activities, this is just greatly increased my confidence, give me a boost that I can stretch my comfort zone. Yeah, it gives you a real buzz, and proves that stick to your guns and enjoy, and certainly my confidence in speaking, in being able to construct a speech with your help, has given me a real shot in the arm.
Been brilliant too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. So nice to see you again, my love, and hopefully we'll catch up probably sometime next year.
So in Manchester on stage, you were also joined by classicist and cultural historian Edith Hall.
Edith is amazing. I'd asked all the participants and the panelists if they had particular speeches, public or well-known speeches that are out there in the public sphere, if they fancied sharing anything, because I thought it would be kind of an interesting way in to learn a little bit more about the speakers and things that motivate them and what they love. And she read this amazing speech from Sojourner Truth, who is an African American woman who had been herself a slave and was speaking at this kind of coalition of women in like something like, I'm going to get the date wrong, something like 1863.
I think it was 1851. So you're or maybe it's 1850. Let's find out.
And this speech was amazing. It was phenomenal. It had this refrain like, "And ain't I a woman after everything? And ain't I a woman?" And Edith delivered it delivered it beautifully.
Edith also brought quite a lot to that event around just looking at the history. And Edith was really able to make a very strong connection to how that's influenced today, to see how fundamental it was for our project. So she talked quite eloquently about the ABCD.
And I'll just sum up Aristotle's rhetoric to you. In English, beautifully comes down to ABCD, okay? Doesn't make ABCD in ancient Greek, but it's ABCD. Audience. Think about who you're talking to, what their emotional and social needs are, what they're likely to respond to. Think very, very hard. You might have an audience of people who don't agree with you that you're trying to win over. You might have an audience of people who do agree with you, who you want to incite to action. Right? That might be the Churchill speech. Right? You've got to think exactly about that relationship and whether they're currently identifying with you at the beginning or whether you're trying to win them over, and what emotional things will get them believing you. Second, brevity. Look at Sojourner Truth. That took about 90 seconds. But I think you can all still remember what she said. The shorter, the better. Right. That was my only real complaint about Rachel Reeves at the Labour Party conference. We get it, you'll be an Iron Chancellor, right? I mean, it was very powerful, and I think may actually be instrumental in making a political change. I think there are a lot of people who would never vote Labour normally, who thought, say fair sound. I would cut it by half if I'd been a speechwriter. Absolutely. Clarity. What is the point of a speech if nobody can sum it up in a sentence, right? What is the point? Like, I will be an Iron Chancellor, or ain't I a woman, right? You've got to be able to sum it up in a sentence, ideally one that has been given you in slogan form at some point in the speech. No, clarity. There is no point in making a speech people don't understand. And then delivery. A, B, C, D. Audience, brevity, clarity, delivery. Delivery is a very big category, but it's being audible, it's being respectful, it's creating a personality that is plausible and people will believe. It's about the sort of material, sensible, by which I mean the senses aspect of speech making.
I love Edith's ABCD. I can't help reflecting kind of now that comes from a place of sort of sophistry where, like, this is how you make a speech. You've got your argument. You might be arguing one thing one day and you might be arguing the next thing the next day. And all you need to think about is your audience, whether it's clear, whether it's short and succinct, and whether you're passionate about it in your delivery as an actor. But what I think that misses from our project, the actual urge, the passion for what it is that you're talking about. Every single person, as we've sort of talked about already, like, they all really had something that they want to speak to and about. And it's that makes these speeches so powerful. Yes, definitely A, B, C, D, but it's something else about there's an E that's missing in that, which is, and I'm trying to find, I was kind of desperately racking my brains. Is it like an urge that I can spell with an E? Is it like the embryo of that idea that, like, that needs to make a good speech needs to come from a place of absolute integrity and authenticity, and that's what these speeches that we worked on did.
That's so close to an E, isn't it?
Which bit?
Authenticity.
Yeah,
no, I think we're stretching. So the second person that we really wanted to bring in to this episode is Morale. When did you first meet Morale?
Morale came to our workshop that we did at the Manchester Deaf Centre in September. Morale actually works with an organisation called Deaf Explorers. So she was sort of participating in that workshop in some ways as a participant herself, but also as an organiser. She's unbelievable. She's an extraordinary woman. Came from Iran, and her speech was about that. We spent quite a lot of time with her, supporting her sort of in one-on-one, that's Alan and myself, with a morale, working out what it was that she wanted to say and how she would say it, building on the kind of the structure of writing a speech. Morale wrote the speech in English, which I think is her like fourth language, and she wrote that. It was a typed speech that we kind of batted to and fro. But she delivered the speech, and when we spoke to her on the phone, she was communicating in British Sign Language, in BSL, which is like her fourth language. And I believe, and again, I think she said it in her speech, that she only learnt to sign when she came to the UK. Before that, she had been lip reading Farsi. So even in that, like, writing and communicating something in her fourth language, I think third or fourth language, is extraordinary. What we miss by listening to this extraordinary audio of her speech, interpreted by Lauren, is the way and the manner with which she delivered it. It was just her whole, the expression, the physicality of the delivery, the passion with which she brought to that isn't really conveyed through an audio experience. But it was just a privilege to hear her and to enable her to bring her story to the stage.
My name is Morale, and I'm a refugee. It's not something that I necessarily want, but unfortunately this is my story. I like the UK. I'm quite happy here and everything that I have, I appreciate, but I would like to go home to my family, my home country of Iran. Unfortunately, it's not safe for me to go back to Iran. I came to England to study jewellery making at Birmingham City University. And when I arrived here, I noticed that people had freedom to make their own decisions and live their life in the way that they wanted to. And it encouraged me to reflect on my own childhood and the way that I was forced, throughout my education, almost felt brainwashed. And I felt like maybe some of the things that I'd learned wasn't necessarily 100% true. So, for example, one of the things that we're taught in Iran is in relation to hair, and we're taught that women have to cover up their hair to protect themselves, keep themselves safe, to stop men being attracted to them, or potentially even hurting them. But when I arrived in the UK, I noticed that women were making their own decisions, and I felt that I didn't have that choice growing up. So I decided to cut my hair and to create a brooch through one of my university projects. And I used the hair to create a brooch, and it was my way of challenging the Iranian regime and things that I'd experienced when I was growing up. Because through university, they asked us to film our projects. So I filmed myself cutting my hair and uploaded it to the university website. Unfortunately, the Iranian embassy were monitoring my movements here in the UK and keeping an eye on what I was doing. And they were able to access the video online. The Iranian government then said I had to go back to Iran to answer for my behaviour and to explain why I made that project. I didn't expect that. I'm miles away from Iran and they're still monitoring me. They're still checking what I'm doing every day. Imagine if I was in Iran, how controlling that must feel, to follow their strict regime and to always have to answer to somebody. I felt I had no choice. I had to seek asylum here in the UK. Growing up in Iran is really tough, and they run a really, really strict regime with lots of rules and lots of laws. Now I'm in the UK, I feel like I do have some freedom, but sometimes I feel a little bit torn. I don't know where my freedom is because obviously I grew up in Iran, things are really different. Iran have got a lot of rules, they've got a lot of laws, and a lot of their laws and rules are influenced by religion, and the two really are entangled within one another. The people that create the laws and the rules in Iran, they do so based on their own religious beliefs, and therefore the religion really, really does influence the law. If you, as an Iranian person, have opposing beliefs, it's against the law. If you want to make decisions about your own clothing, you want to choose what you want to wear, it's against the law. There's no freedom of speech or right to make opposing decisions, it's against the law. As a deaf girl growing up in Iran, it was really tough for me getting on with my everyday life. I didn't sign back in Iran, and I was forced to lip read people, and I was also forced to learn Arabic language. I was told that I had to speak Arabic so that Allah could understand and listen to me. It was hard, and I felt constantly lost all the time over who I was. Now I'm here talking to you guys today, pretty big audience. I'm just a normal person, living my everyday life. I'm not necessarily involved in politics, I'm not an activist by any means. I'm here in England, and to be honest, I don't pay much attention to the politics here. But if you're born in Iran, you really have no choice. You're automatically born into a political regime. I understand that for some countries whereby the law and the religion seem so closely connected to one another, it can be quite difficult to challenge their regime and their ideologies. But I just want to say that if you support human rights in Iran, that does not make you Islamophobic.
Morale's speech was so impactful because it really spotlit
or simple solution
the responsibility I think this project carries, and I know you carry, around enabling people to take their voice, to take their space. And that can have incredible impact in terms of change, but there can also be an element of opening yourself up to criticism, to suppression, and resistance to the message that you so powerfully want to bring. I was so grateful to hear Morale's story, but it's also just so important to recognise the implication of finding that voice. What do we do with those voices once they've been unleashed, so they've been heard?
I mean, I think this is just the beginning of that journey. It was really powerful, obviously, to
And at the end of the day, what I have here in the
hear
UK,
those speeches
I'm
again
really grateful
and to
for,
work
and I
one-on-one
completely
last week with
appreciate.
the participants.
But
Like
of
how
course,
we,
I would prefer to go back to my home
they were very
country
full days
in
for me
Iran, where I
because,
could be with my family.
as well as of chairing the
I
conversations
call my mum
in
every
the
day on
evening, I spent the
FaceTime
afternoon
at a set time.
working one-on-one with the participants to
And for
kind
me
of build their
today, the
confidence for the
purpose of
space,
speaking
but think
to
about
you
delivery
would
and
be
think,
to
relook
support
at the
me
words and make sure they were still
safely.
words that sat comfortably with them and so on. It was really fascinating to see them again. We have got work still to do to find platforms for those voices to be heard in their communities, the people who can help change things, and actually being able to have Rinku Barpaga and Zara Manuhutu there, who were talking about what they do with that responsibility and how to kind of to create space for them to be heard, and how to play the game so their voices are heard if they are, in conventional places, whether that's Zara representing people of colour whose voices are not heard because their experiences are so marginalised, or that's Rinku talking about the deaf community and being heard as a deaf person in a hearing world. But interestingly also, because actually his approach and the things he's pushing for are not necessarily conventionally heard in the deaf community too. So he was also, I learned a lot from listening to them, finding ways to provide space for them to be heard by me and also by the audience was brilliant. But it's not easy. It's not an easy job, and it's only just beginning, and we need to work harder to be listening and to be providing space for less heard voices to be out there.
Zara, you are a youth worker, an activist, a speech maker. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how your voice and using your voice comes into your work?
My voice used to get me in a lot of trouble, so using it as a young person landed me in some sticky situations at home, at school, gobby, outspoken, obnoxious, disrespectful. These were kind of the labels that I had, but my voice was a gift. When I'm a youth worker. I currently work for an organisation called Kids of Colour, which is a youth project which is focused on race, identity and culture for young people of colour here in Greater Manchester. And it's the youth project that I wish that I had growing up. There's a lot of healing work that takes place for me just working there. And I've been doing youth work for like 12 years. And it's actually my lived experience and all of the labels that I carry as a woman of colour, neurodiverse, care leaver, first generation British, all of the labels that are given to me, and youth work that drove me into activism, or now I'd call it community organising. And you could call me a speech maker in two ways. There's me on a Saturday at a protest with a megaphone, leading chants and, calling out local authority leaders and governments and institutions and the GMP. And then I'm an orator in smaller spaces like this, in community meetings. I don't think all speeches are about standing up with a microphone. I think some of it is about dialogue with other people, connecting with other people. Like, that's the point to me of speeches, is connections, relationship, engaging in dialogue, learning, sharing information, developing as a person, and that's how I spend my time as a youth worker. My friends tell me that I chat bubbles for a living, which actually is true. Like, I do a lot of talking in my job, but I also do a lot of listening, a lot of understanding, a lot of researching, and so that's where I found myself, and that's why I'm so heavily influenced by the Black Power movement. Another speech that I was going to mention, which ties in quite nicely with what we've heard from others today, was from Fred Hampton, and it was about you can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail the revolution. And they're words that I live by, and I think they're words that a lot of us grassroots and grassroots to me means community, lived experience, shared identities. And I think they're words that we hold really close to our hearts, especially in times of struggle. And even when we're on the up, right? Because cycles and things move, and sometimes joy, not everyday struggle.
And is your education in this role that is it all self-taught? Is it from listening to and watching videos? I mean, were you ever sat down and said, this is how you write a speech?
No. I in school, I was the kid that came up with an idea, and my friends joined me to do it. So I'd say it's a lifelong kind of skill that I've developed, for better or for worse. I also spent a lot of time in the church as a kid. I have watched sermons, preachers, meetings, that kind of stuff. I was dragged to protest and public meetings as a kid, then went voluntarily as I got older. And kind of, just surrounded myself with people and then learned from others. And kind of learned over time that you can shout and scream at somebody, but sometimes you've got to be a bit tactical with presenting information so that actually people choose to listen to you instead of just pretending to.
And that's a sort of learned over time is kind of euphemism for made some serious mistakes.
Also, I mean, there are spaces that definitely wouldn't welcome me back again for shouting at them and telling them truths that they weren't receptive to. Truths nonetheless, but they weren't ready to hear them or just didn't want to hear them. But with mistake comes learning. Is anything really a mistake? For me, a mistake is when you cause harm to somebody, and I like to think that I don't do that. I just don't play by rules that are given to us if they don't serve me and my community.
Alan, were you into?
That's really interesting to hear, especially that what you said there though about sometimes being a bit tactical, because that's one of the essential sort of propositions of rhetoric, right? Not to be misleading or pretend, but to think when you're trying to persuade someone. How do I say this for that person or for that group? Can I adapt my words a little bit so that I can explain what they need to know? It's different for this group, different for that group. And you can hear in the speeches that we've heard today how people have thought about how can they explain the situation to people to bring them along so they can understand what it is so they can make their proposition. So you're being an excellent rhetorician, kind of instinctively knowing that it's partly about thinking who the audience is and how to speak to them. And that's why it's part of that brings people together, can be about making connections.
I wondered, Rinky, whether you have what Zara's saying about kind of working out where you can find a voice and how you use that voice. Sounds familiar to you in your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got lots of similar experiences to Zara. One example is campaigning against racism within the deaf community. I created a film which revealed to the world the systemic racism within the deaf community, and I felt like I had a voice against the old generation of white deaf people. And it's really interesting because Alan said, you know, when you meet someone, you have to adapt your communication style to them. I completely agree, but unfortunately, in the deaf community, there's lots of people who have a voice, but we don't see it in the mainstream. We don't see it on TV and social media. You know, so how am I supposed to learn from these important role models if they don't use sign language, if I don't see it in the mainstream? So I feel like I'm almost like a frontline soldier, and I was the one who stepped on the bomb and exposed everything, and I took the backlash for it. So I felt like I had to adapt my style and try and change the way that I educate people, because that brash way wasn't right. And I completely disagreed with what was going on in the deaf community, but I had to adapt my style to suppress some of what was going on. I feel as though I watch politics and I see hearing people on the TV and I read the subtitles and I know what their perspective is, but they don't know what my perspective is. I've found out a lot about the deaf community, obviously through my lived experience and through Paddy Ladd's book, but it's frustrating because who's going to listen to my voice?
Some people are listening to your voice. Can you tell? And we're listening to it now. Can you tell us a little bit about what about your voice and what you are doing as an artist, not what your work is?
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult for us deaf people to find the platforms, to find the opportunities to get up on the stage, especially before social media. So I decided that in order to enact change, I would get involved in stand-up comedy. I found it extremely difficult because in the mainstream they said deaf people can't be funny, but in America they accepted the deaf community. So I went over there and I thought, I'm gonna show people what I'm about. I'm going to tell my jokes. And as I told those jokes, I brought in some important deaf activism. You know, I spoke about the racism in schools, sign language being banned in schools. So, you know, I was practicing this activism from an early stage and sort of sneaking it into my shows. Another show that I worked on recently was called Made in India, Scratched Out Britain. And lots of people, felt as though I shouldn't be telling my story because it was so brash and they didn't want to hear about the oppression that I'd been facing because of feeling guilty. So I found a really clever way to portray the difficulties that we face in the deaf community in a beautiful theatrical way. So I'm constantly adapting my voice to make sure that it is heard. My one-man show is a completely unique show, something you've never seen in theatre and on the TV. And, it's an amazing way for me to show my voice. The other deaf people within the community, like Rose, are fantastic at portraying what it's like to be a deaf person in society and the oppression that they face, and I want to continue working to change the world.
Another moment that really struck me around the impact of finding your voice was when we heard from a member of the audience in Manchester about feeling lost and really not knowing where they stood politically at the moment, and really reaching out to the panel to find an answer to that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Marie. That moment was really emotional. She was very emotional. You could sort of feel in the room this sort of desire to kind of give her a big hug. Actually, Zara responded phenomenally in that moment. Zara just jumped in and said, I just feel your pain. You just need to look after yourself. You need to create spaces for rest as well as activism and find your people. And I'm pretty sure that they connected through that event. I think they went off and had a drink in the bar together. It was afterwards it was really important, and gosh, that person was very brave to talk and to speak out. in that moment in the audience and to kind of make themselves vulnerable. I think there's a jeopardy in speaking out and that making yourself vulnerable in that moment, which every single one of our participants have done in some way through the process. And it turns out the audiences were doing it too. So that was really extraordinary. There were, I think, 25%, maybe 30% of the audience that night were from the deaf community in Manchester, and that was also really important for us that they felt welcomed and were part and heard as part of the event. We had several wonderful BSL interpreters on stage with us and creating their space where our conversation could be as accessible as possible.
I think it's fair to say that this project it's just profoundly impacted so many people as individuals, though we've worked with so many groups. In many ways, if you told me that this project had been going for years and you'd been doing these one-on-one workshops, I believe you from going to those events. But the third voice that we want to hear from is Charlie, around that impact that the project has had on him. How did you meet Charlie? How did we meet Charlie?
We met Charlie in Norwich. Charlie was part of this group which called the Common Lot, which is a sort of community-led theatre company that's based in a council estate called Mile Cross in Norwich. And Charlie's a musician. He was a natural orator. They were like, he was dropping in the rule of three. Alan was so proud. The rule of three within the rule of three. It was gorgeous, and he was enjoying the process. But to come back to that E, or the missing letter, it came from a really powerful personal place for Charlie.
Working class kids today are more than likely to be growing up in privately rented properties, where the cost of rent is, on average, 22% higher than local authority housing. Their parents can't afford music lessons. They often can't even afford the basic necessities: clothing, heating, food. Nearly 4 million children went to school hungry this year. Our housing is intrinsically tied to our health. Poor housing means poor health. 100 years ago, working class people living in the slums were dying of typhoid due to their unsanitary conditions. Today, slum landlords provide housing full of damp and black mould, leading to a rise in respiratory conditions and sometimes even resulting in death. Housing has a huge influence on mental health as well. Children living in poor housing are more likely to be stressed, anxious, and depressed. All of this contributes to a whole generation being stuck in a cycle of poverty, low attainment, and shortened life expectancy. What chance have they got to be creative, to grow, to thrive, when they are going to bed every night, hungry, cold, and depressed? We're not building them a future, we're taking it away. But we can build a better future. We've done it before. We started building social housing in this country over 100 years ago with the Homes for Heroes Act.
I think what was always also so incredible was when you caught up with Charlie after the event, and just to hear what they'd taken away from it and the learning that they'd had was also really insightful.
What was really wonderful about that last event that we had in London was that we had 7 participants in person from Norwich, Brighton, Newham, Oxford, and Cornwall, and they'd all come together, and they'd been from 5 different workshops, and we worked together through the course of the day, and I worked individually with them, but they kind of bonded through the afternoon, and by the time they were kind of in our event, they all sat together at a table, and they were filming each other and supporting each other as they went up to give their speech. They became a little community. It was a community of communities, and that kind of individual voices, but actually the support and encouragement that they gave each other to really be themselves them to bring themselves was really powerful. And I loved that experience, really, of sort of seeing the power of that kind of power of that, the strength of it. You know, we did a game of Zip Zap Boing in the room. Of course we did Zip Zap Boing. In the room in the afternoon. It was like we dropped in. We're building small theatre ensembles all the way around the country. And that was a sort of a little regathering of them again for that afternoon.
So, Charlie, you were the last person this evening to deliver your speech. There was quite a lot of pressure. How was it finally giving the speech?
Oh, it was really good. Going last is a mixed bag because, you're like, yeah, I got the last spot. But also then you have to build up the entire evening thinking, okay, I've still got to go. You don't get to relax. It's just such a lovely warm room, you know, and I think we all had loads of time to prepare, and we all felt really prepared, and loads of really great feedback as well from yourself and from everyone else on the project, that like actually when you get up there I kind of felt like, you know, I think I've got this. All I've got to do now is deliver it the best I can.
You really delivered it powerfully, with loads of passion. I think it was the most passionate I've heard you.
Everyone's speech upped from the rehearsal. Everyone delivered at a far higher level this evening than they had this afternoon, which was really, really nice to see.
I completely agree. What was it? You know, obviously you were speaking about housing, and it was such a mix because there were so many different people from so many different places. Do you have any reflections, kind of hearing that kind of diversity of topics?
Yeah, it was just, firstly, it was really nice. It was really nice to hear such a diversity, and to hear about things that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of before, you know, like, for example, we had someone speaking about their experience as a black person at drama college, and how the world, you know, is how it all sort of revolves around white people essentially, and that's not an experience I can ever share, you know, and I can't share the experience of, you know, a woman's experience of trying to battle against kind of misogyny, and particularly our speakers talk about her, you know, her Indian background, and her parents saying about there was an honour in a woman becoming an actor, and those are experiences that I can't personally first person understand them. So it was really nice to be able to hear them and to hear the passion with which they were delivered, and to try and to get some understanding of that through that passion and through that other person sharing their lived experience.
And there's a lot of sadness in all the speeches, but what's wonderful about them is that they all end in a real kind of sense of optimism. Every single one this evening suggests a way forward, and I feel that very strongly that for tonight, not just generally for us where we are in the year at the moment, entering the winter when it's really difficult out there in the world, to hear all this optimism. And I guess I'm grateful to you, Charlie, for being able to help see a way forward, but for everybody too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's so important to have optimism. Most importantly, when things are hard, and things are horrifically hard for a lot of people at the moment. And if you don't have optimism, you don't fight, and that's what we're all wanting to do, right? I mean, all those speakers, we're all up there saying, no, we've got to fight for those things. And if you don't believe you can change them, then you're never going to fight for them. So I fundamentally believe we can change.
So here we are. We have so much material. We have hours and hours and hours of recordings.
I'm so sorry for you to have
Don't be sorry. It's been my absolute pleasure. It's just very challenging to do it justice in a podcast, but we're trying, and thank goodness we've got 4 episodes to do it in. What does all of this material tell us? What does it tell you?
I really don't know, Marie. I mean, I've got voices in my head. I've got their voices. I've got their, like, the things that they wanted to talk about. I have their speeches. I have them.
You know, the things that they said to me while we were writing the speeches that never made it into the text. You know, it's so rich. It's just phenomenal. And now we have to make a play about it. And there's really some really interesting, quite brings up loads of interesting questions about, like, you know, how can we ask actors to play these characters, these people, to bring in, and, like, you know, what do they do about accents? What do they do about their lived experiences? Because it's been, you know, we've encountered people from very many lived experiences around the country, and they've been sharing those lived experiences with us. So how does that translate? So I've got lots of questions. I don't know the answers yet, but I think what this process has shown me, particularly working with you on the podcast, where you do such a beautiful job at representing so many of those fragments of those speeches, and they can sit alone as well as, you know, you don't need to hear the full speech. You don't need to know the background of the person. You can just have a sentence, and gosh, it's a whole world. So how do we translate all of that into something that feels powerful and sums it up and gives a sense of the picture of the country? I don't know yet, but that's the job for next year to work out, as well as continue to do more workshops. I mean, there's such an interest in it, so we're going to find a way to build more workshops, to go back to some of the places that we've been to continue to connections with all those communities. There's a lot to do, but it's very exciting as a journey.
So much to do. Can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to 2024 and hearing some more of these stories, and seeing what makes it to the stage, hearing those personal journeys and where they get to, and where these participants are in a year, in 2-3 years, where they're going to be, and the impact this project has beyond that.
And of course, like, there's an election to come at some point that will, like, you know, potentially help to usher in an era which might bring about and help to sort of put some of their changes into place, or not. And, you know, what do you do with all those expectations? Next government have got a lot riding on them,
don't they?
But to sort of wrap up, because I have to go, our public house has been funded by an amazing partnership from the Arts and Humanities Research Council and Arts Council England and the Three Monkeys Trust, and many wonderful individuals. And I'm most of all just hugely grateful to all of the people who've shared their stories by writing speeches with us and coming to the workshops, supporting the workshops, facilitating them, and then most of all the participants who were able to kind of brave the stage to share those speeches with us. Thank you very much. If you like the Dash Arts podcast, please share with your friends, talk about it, tell everybody to listen, review us, like us, share us and review us. Thank you very much.